Woman saves abandoned Mustang from forest. What follows will break your heart. The wind whipped through Blaze's mane, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. He tossed his head, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled the crisp mountain air. The rising sun painted the Nevada sky in hues of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the valley where his herd grazed. Blaze, a magnificent stallion with a coat the color of burnished copper, was the leader of this band of wild Mustangs. His muscles rippled beneath his sleek hide as he moved with an effortless grace, his dark eyes alert, ever watchful for danger. Life was a constant struggle for survival in the high desert, but Blaze relished the freedom. He knew every hidden spring, every patch of sweet grass, every treacherous ravine in their territory. He led his herd with a firm but gentle hand, protecting the mares and foals from predators and rival stallions. There was a deep sense of belonging, a primal connection to the land and his herd that ran through his veins like a powerful current. This morning, a sense of unease prickled at the edges of his awareness. The air crackled with a tension he couldn't explain. He watched as a young filly, her coat still dappled with foal markings, pranced around her mother, her playful nips met with gentle nudges. A wave of protectiveness washed over him. He would defend his family with his life. Suddenly, a distant rumble shattered the morning calm. It grew louder, closer, morphing into the distinct roar of engines. Panic surged through the herd. They had encountered these metal beasts before, knew the danger they represented. Blaze's heart pounded against his ribs as he let out a shrill whinny, urging his herd to flee. They thundered across the valley, their hooves pounding the dry earth, a desperate race for survival. But the metal beasts were faster, herding them towards a narrow canyon, a trap. Blaze fought to break free to lead his family to safety, but it was too late. The canyon walls closed in, and the roar of the engines became a deafening cacophony. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed, their bodies crashing against each other in the frenzied panic. Dust filled the air, choking and blinding. Blaze felt a searing pain in his leg as he stumbled, a heavy weight crashing into him. He struggled to rise, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but the herd was scattering, swept away in the chaos. He was alone. Strong hands grabbed his mane, pulling him to his feet. He thrashed, his eyes wild with fear, but a rope tightened around his neck, choking him into submission. He was dragged towards a metal enclosure, the ground tilting beneath his hooves. The world spun, and then darkness swallowed him whole. When Blaze regained consciousness, he was trapped in a cramped trailer, the stench of urine and fear thick in the air. Other horses pressed against him, their bodies trembling, their eyes wide with terror. He had been captured, torn from his family, his freedom ripped away. A deep, agonizing sorrow settled over him, a grief so profound it threatened to consume him. His wild spirit, once untamed and free, was now broken, caged within the confines of this metal prison. The trailer rattled and swayed, a jarring symphony of metal and horseflesh. Blaze, his injured leg throbbing, huddled in the corner, his head hung low. The journey seemed endless, a blur of highways and dusty roads. He barely registered the other horses around him, their shared misery a dull ache in his awareness. He was lost in a sea of despair, the memory of his herd, his freedom, a fading echo in his mind. Finally, the trailer lurched to a halt, and the doors were flung open. Harsh sunlight flooded the interior, blinding him momentarily. He was shoved and prodded, forced down a ramp and into a holding pen. The air was thick with the stench of manure and the cacophony of panicked whinnies and snorts. Blaze found himself amidst a sea of horses, all bearing the same wild, terrified look in their eyes. He recognized some from his own herd, their once proud heads now lowered in defeat. Others were strangers, bearing the brands of different ranges, their coats matted and scarred. They were all prisoners of this place, a holding ground for captured Mustangs. Over the next few days, Blaze witnessed the brutal efficiency of the operation. Horses were sorted, branded, and auctioned off. He watched families torn apart, foals ripped from their mothers, stallions separated from their mares. The air was thick with the palpable sense of loss and despair. Blaze, with his injured leg and wild spirit, was deemed less desirable. He was relegated to a smaller pen, forgotten and neglected. Days turned into weeks, and his condition worsened. His once gleaming coat grew dull, his muscles wasted away. The fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a dull resignation. One day, two men entered his pen. They spoke in gruff voices, their words laced with disdain. They poked and prodded him, their rough hands eliciting flinches of pain. He was nothing more than a commodity to them, his worth measured in dollars and cents. "Ain't worth much, this one." One of them spat, his breath reeking of stale tobacco. "Lame leg, spirits broken. Might as well put him down." Blaze's heart pounded in his chest. He understood the finality in their words. He was going to die, alone and forgotten in this desolate place. A wave of terror washed over him, a primal fear of oblivion. But then, a different voice cut through the air. "No, wait." It was a younger man, his face etched with a hesitant compassion. "He might still be useful. We can take him to the woods. Leave him for the bears." Blaze didn't understand their words, but he sensed the malice in their tone. He was to be discarded, left as bait for some unknown predator. A fresh wave of despair washed over him, extinguishing the last embers of hope. The next day, he was loaded onto a truck, his injured leg screaming in protest. The journey was short, a bumpy ride through dense forest. Then, the truck stopped, and the tailgate slammed open. He was dragged out, his hooves slipping on the uneven ground. A rope was tied around his neck, tethering him to a tree. He struggled, his eyes wild with fear, but it was futile. He was left there, alone in the deepening shadows of the woods, his fate sealed. The dense forest, once a place of life and vitality, now seemed like a tomb. Blaze, tethered to the rough bark of a towering pine, was left to his own devices. The initial shock of his abandonment had given way to a numb despair. His injured leg throbbed with each movement, a constant reminder of his vulnerability. As darkness enveloped the forest, a chill crept into the air. The sounds of the wilderness grew louder, more menacing. The rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, the distant howl of a coyote, each noise sent a shiver down his spine. He was prey, a helpless creature at the mercy of the night. The days that followed were a blur of pain and hunger. The rope chafed his neck, and his injured leg grew worse with every passing hour. He tried to reach the nearby stream, but his weakness hindered his progress. The forest, once a source of sustenance, now seemed hostile and indifferent to his plight. As his strength waned, he began to hallucinate. He saw mirages of his herd, their playful antics a stark contrast to his solitary existence. He heard the comforting voice of his mother, her gentle whinnies soothing his troubled mind. But these illusions were fleeting, shattered by the harsh reality of his situation. Just when he thought he couldn't endure any more, a glimmer of hope appeared. A small, furry creature, a squirrel, approached him cautiously. It seemed drawn to his plight, its curiosity overcoming its fear. It hopped onto his back, nibbling at the dried grass caught in his mane. The gentle touch, the warmth of its tiny body, brought a flicker of comfort to his weary soul. The squirrel, a creature of the forest, understood the harshness of the wilderness. It brought him nuts and berries, small gifts of sustenance that helped him survive. With each passing day, a fragile bond formed between the two, a connection forged in the depths of the forest. As the days turned into weeks, Blaze's condition improved, albeit slowly. The squirrel's companionship, the forest's healing touch, and an innate will to survive kept him alive. He was a survivor, a creature of the wild, and he would not succumb to despair. Sarah, a woman weathered by years of solitude and the harsh realities of life, emerged from her cabin. the morning mist clinging to her worn flannel shirt. Her weathered face, framed by strands of graying hair, held a deep sadness, a reflection of the losses she had endured. Yet, her eyes, the color of faded denim, still held a spark of resilience, a testament to her enduring spirit. She lived a simple life, her days filled with the rhythms of the forest. She tended to her small garden, gathered herbs for her remedies, and cared for the injured animals that found their way to her doorstep. The forest was her sanctuary, a place where she found solace and a connection to the natural world. As she walked along the familiar path, a sense of unease settled over her. The air was heavy with a strange tension, a disruption in the usual harmony of the woods. She followed the feeling, her footsteps guided by an unseen force. Then, she saw him, a magnificent Mustang. His coat, the color of burnished copper, stood tethered to a tree. His head hung low. His body was gaunt, his once proud spirit broken. A wave of pity washed over her, a deep empathy for the suffering creature. She approached him cautiously, her movements slow and deliberate. His eyes, dark and filled with pain, met hers. She saw the fear, the resignation, the flicker of hope that still lingered within him. "Easy now," she whispered, her voice soft and soothing. "I won't hurt you." She reached out a hand, her touch gentle, reassuring. He flinched, his body trembling with apprehension. She understood his fear, the trauma he had endured. "It's all right," she murmured, her voice a balm to his wounded spirit. "You're safe now." She examined his injured leg, her experienced hands gently probing the swollen flesh. It was badly infected, neglected for far too long. She knew she had to act quickly if she wanted to save him. With a determination born from years of caring for injured creatures, she set about tending to his wounds. She cleaned the infected leg, applied a poultice of herbs, and wrapped it in a clean cloth. He stood still, his body tense, but his eyes held a glimmer of trust, a spark of hope rekindled. Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The road to recovery would be long and arduous, filled with challenges and setbacks. But she was committed to helping him, to restoring his spirit, to giving him a second chance at life. As she looked into his eyes, she felt a connection, a bond forming between them, a shared understanding of pain and resilience. Sarah's small cabin, nestled deep within the woods, became a sanctuary for Blaze. She cleared a space in the barn, creating a makeshift stall for him, lined with fresh hay and blankets. The scent of pine and the soft rustling of leaves provided a comforting backdrop to his recovery. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah dedicated herself to nursing Blaze back to health. She cleaned his wounds with meticulous care, applying herbal poultices and soothing balms. She coaxed him to eat, offering him fresh water and buckets of oats. She spoke to him in soft, reassuring tones, her voice a constant presence in his solitude. Blaze, initially wary of human touch, slowly began to respond to Sarah's kindness. He allowed her to groom him, his tense muscles relaxing under her gentle strokes. He nuzzled her hand, seeking the comfort of her presence. He began to trust her, his fear gradually replaced by a sense of security. Sarah, in turn, found herself drawn to Blaze's quiet strength and resilience. She saw the pain in his eyes, the lingering trauma of his capture and abandonment. She recognized a kindred spirit, a fellow survivor who had endured hardship and loss. As Blaze's physical wounds healed, Sarah focused on his emotional well-being. She spent hours with him, talking softly, reading aloud from her worn books, or simply sitting in companionable silence. She introduced him to the other animals she cared for, a rescued owl with a broken wing, a family of orphaned raccoons, a timid deer with a limp. These interactions, gentle and non-threatening, helped Blaze regain his sense of connection, his place in the natural world. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows across the barn, Sarah sat beside Blaze, her hand resting on his flank. He leaned into her touch, his head resting on her shoulder. A sense of peace settled over them, a shared understanding that transcended words. "You're going to be all right, Blaze," she whispered, her voice filled with conviction. "You're home now." In that moment, a deep bond was forged between them, a connection born of compassion, resilience, and the healing power of nature. Sarah had found a purpose, a renewed sense of hope in caring for this magnificent creature. And Blaze, for the first time since his capture, felt a glimmer of peace, a sense of belonging in this new, unexpected haven. As the weeks passed and Blaze grew stronger, Sarah noticed a troubling pattern. While he accepted her care and seemed to enjoy her company, there were moments when he would suddenly become skittish and withdrawn. A loud noise, a sudden movement, or even a change in the weather could trigger a wave of panic, sending him into a frenzy of fear. One afternoon, as Sarah approached him with a bucket of fresh water, Blaze reared back, his eyes wide with terror. He snorted and pawed the ground, his body trembling. Sarah, startled but undeterred, spoke to him in soothing tones, trying to calm him. But he remained agitated, his fear palpable. Sarah realized that Blaze's trauma ran deeper than his physical wounds. The capture, the separation from his herd, the cruel treatment he had endured, these experiences had left deep scars on his psyche. He was haunted by the ghosts of his past, his wild instincts clashing with his newfound trust in her. Determined to help him overcome his fears, Sarah adopted a patient and gentle approach. She avoided sudden movements, spoke in soft tones, and respected his need for space when he felt overwhelmed. She introduced him to new experiences gradually, allowing him to explore the surrounding woods at his own pace, always offering a safe haven to return to. One day, as they were walking through the forest, a flock of birds took flight, their wings beating a frantic rhythm against the silence. Blaze flinched, his body tensing, but instead of bolting, he turned to Sarah, seeking reassurance. She stroked his neck, her touch a calming presence. "It's all right, Blaze," she whispered. "They're just birds. You're safe here." He stood still for a moment, his nostrils flaring, his ears twitching. Then he lowered his head and resumed grazing, his fear subsiding. It was a small victory, a sign that he was slowly learning to trust, to let go of the past. Sarah knew the journey would be long, filled with setbacks and challenges, but she was committed to helping Blaze heal, to guiding him towards a place of peace and acceptance. She understood that his wild spirit, though wounded, was an integral part of who he was, and she would honor that spirit, allowing him the freedom to be himself, to find his own path to healing. Despite the sanctuary Sarah provided, Blaze couldn't completely shake the call of the wild. He would often stand at the edge of the clearing, his nostrils testing the wind, his ears swiveling towards the distant sounds of the forest. He would whinny into the vast expanse, a lonely cry that echoed through the trees, a yearning for something lost. Sarah understood his longing. She knew that a part of him still belonged to the wild, to the freedom of the open range, to the camaraderie of his herd. She had witnessed the untamed spirit within him, the fire that burned beneath his gentle exterior. One night, under the glow of a full moon, Blaze's restlessness reached its peak. He paced the perimeter of his enclosure, his hooves drumming a restless rhythm against the earth. He tossed his head, his mane flowing in the night breeze, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. Sarah, awakened by his agitation, came to him, her presence a calming influence. She stroked his flank, her touch gentle and reassuring. "What is it, Blaze?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. "What troubles you?" He nuzzled her hand, his breath warm against her skin. He looked towards the forest, his eyes filled with a longing she couldn't deny. She understood. He was yearning for his freedom, for the life he had known before. She couldn't keep him captive, not when his spirit was so clearly tied to the wild. With a heavy heart, she made a decision. She would open the gate, give him the choice to stay or leave. It was a risk, a leap of faith, but she trusted him, trusted the bond they had forged. The next morning, she led him to the edge of the clearing. She unlatched the gate, her hand trembling slightly. "You're free to go," "Blaze," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "go back to your herd, to your life in the wild." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and a hint of sadness. He nudged her hand, a silent thank you for her kindness, for her understanding. Then, with a powerful surge, he leaped forward, his hooves pounding the earth. He galloped into the forest, his mane flowing behind him like a banner of freedom. Sarah watched him go, her heart aching with a mixture of sadness and pride. She knew she might never see him again, but she also knew that she had done the right thing. She had given him back his freedom, a gift more precious than anything she could offer. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the space where Blaze had disappeared into the dense undergrowth. A profound silence had fallen over the forest, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant chatter of birds. The emptiness beside her was a physical ache, a constant reminder of his absence. Days turned into weeks, and the silence grew heavier. The once vibrant clearing felt desolate without Blaze's presence. Sarah went about her daily chores with a heavy heart, the joy she had found in caring for him replaced by a gnawing loneliness. One afternoon, as she was tending to her garden, a battered pickup truck rumbled down the dirt road, its engine sputtering and coughing. It came to a halt in front of her cabin, a cloud of dust settling in its wake. A man emerged from the truck, his movements stiff and hesitant. Sarah recognized him instantly, despite the years that had passed. It was Mark, her estranged brother, his face weathered and etched with hardship. His eyes, once filled with mischief and warmth, now held a deep sadness, a reflection of the troubled path he had taken. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. Surprise, apprehension, and a lingering sense of affection battled within her. Mark had been her closest companion in their childhood, their bond forged in the shared solitude of their rural upbringing. But their paths had diverged, his leading him down a road of recklessness and trouble, while hers had led her to the quiet solace of the forest. "Sarah," he said, his voice raspy and uncertain. "It's been a long time." She nodded, her own voice catching in her throat. "Mark, what brings you here?" He shrugged, his gaze shifting towards the ground. I needed a place to stay, just for a while." Sarah hesitated. She knew Mark's history, the trouble that seemed to follow him wherever he went. But she also saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the desperation that had brought him to her doorstep. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can stay, but just for a while." Mark nodded gratefully, a flicker of hope lighting up his weary face. He stepped out of the truck, his movements slow and deliberate. As he approached her, Sarah felt a pang of apprehension, a sense of foreboding that she couldn't shake off. His presence brought a disruption to her peaceful existence, a shadow that threatened to darken her sanctuary. Mark settled into the cabin with a quiet gratitude that surprised Sarah. He helped with chores, chopping wood and mending fences, his movements carrying a newfound purpose. He seemed content with the simple routine, the quiet rhythm of life in the woods. However, Sarah couldn't shake off the unease that lingered beneath the surface. She noticed the way his eyes would dart around, taking in every detail of her surroundings. She sensed a restlessness in him, a hidden agenda that he kept carefully concealed. One day, while Sarah was away gathering herbs, Mark stumbled upon the barn. Curiosity piqued, he ventured inside. The sight that greeted him made his heart pound with excitement. There, in the makeshift stall, stood Blaze. The stallion had returned, drawn back to the sanctuary Sarah had provided. Mark's eyes gleamed with avarice. He saw an opportunity, a chance to exploit the magnificent creature for his own gain. He knew of the lucrative black market for wild horses, the demand for their untamed spirit and powerful physique. He approached Blaze cautiously, his voice a low, soothing murmur. But Blaze, sensing the man's intentions, shied away, his instincts warning him of danger. Mark persisted, his greed overriding his caution. He tried to corner Blaze, his movements becoming more aggressive. Blaze, feeling trapped and threatened, reared back, his hooves striking the air. Mark, caught off guard, stumbled back, his anger flaring. He grabbed a rope, his intentions clear. Just then, Sarah arrived, her heart sinking at the sight of Mark cornering Blaze. She rushed forward, her voice sharp with anger. "Mark, stop. What are you doing?" He turned to her, his face contorted with a mixture of defiance and desperation. "He's worth a fortune, Sarah," he snarled. "We can sell him, get enough money to start over, leave this place behind." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. She couldn't believe her own brother would betray her trust, exploit the creature she had worked so hard to heal. "No, Mark," she said, her voice firm. "He's not yours to sell. He belongs here." Mark's anger escalated. He lunged towards Blaze, the rope whistling through the air. Blaze reared back, his powerful hooves striking Mark's chest. The man stumbled back, his breath knocked out of him. Sarah seized the opportunity. She rushed to Blaze's side, her arms wrapped around his neck. "Run, Blaze!" she cried. "Get out of here!" Blaze, sensing the urgency in her voice, bolted from the barn, his hooves thundering across the clearing. He disappeared into the forest, leaving Sarah and Mark in the tense silence of the barn. Sarah turned to her brother, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. "You betrayed me, Mark," she said, her voice trembling. "You betrayed everything I stand for." Mark, his chest heaving, his face contorted with rage, lunged towards her. But Sarah, fueled by a newfound strength, stood her ground. She pushed him back, her voice filled with a fierce determination. "Get out!" she shouted. "Get out of my house and never come back." Mark, defeated and enraged, stumbled out of the barn, his footsteps echoing in the tense silence. Sarah watched him go, her heart heavy with the weight of his betrayal. The encounter with Mark left Sarah shaken, the tranquility of her sanctuary shattered. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a new resolve took root within her. She would not let her brother's greed and desperation destroy the haven she had created, the life she had built with Blaze. She spent the following days tending to her wounds, both physical and emotional. She repaired the damage to the barn, reinforcing the stall, and securing the perimeter. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a fierce determination to protect her home, her animals, and the fragile peace she had found. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing, Blaze returned. He emerged from the forest, his coat shimmering in the fading light, his eyes filled with a cautious curiosity. Sarah's heart swelled with relief and joy. He had come back, despite the danger, despite the trauma he had endured. She rushed to him, her arms wrapped around his neck, her voice choked with emotion. "Blaze, you came back," she whispered, burying her face in his mane. He nuzzled her, his warm breath against her skin, a silent reassurance of his loyalty and trust. Over the next few days, Sarah and Blaze were inseparable. They roamed the forest together, their bond strengthened by the shared experience, the unspoken understanding that flowed between them. Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose, her life intertwined with his, their fates intertwined. However, the threat of Mark's return loomed over them. Sarah knew he wouldn't give up easily, his greed and desperation fueling his determination. She had to be prepared, had to protect Blaze from further harm. She reached out to the local authorities, reporting Mark's actions and his threats. She also contacted a wildlife sanctuary, seeking their advice and support in protecting Blaze. One night, as Sarah and Blaze were sleeping peacefully in the barn, a noise startled them awake. It was the sound of a truck engine, its familiar rumble echoing through the stillness of the night. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew it was Mark, returning to claim what he believed was rightfully his. She grabbed a sturdy branch, her grip tightening around it, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. The truck screeched to a halt outside the barn, its headlights illuminating the clearing. Mark emerged, his face contorted with anger, a shotgun clutched in his hands. "Get out here, Sarah," he yelled, his voice echoing through the night. "I'm not leaving without that horse." Sarah stepped out of the barn, Blaze close behind her. She stood tall, her voice steady and resolute. "No, Mark," she said. "Blaze is not yours to take. He's free and he chooses to stay here." Mark raised the shotgun, his finger on the trigger. But before he could fire, Blaze charged forward, his powerful body slamming into Mark, knocking him off his feet. The shotgun clattered to the ground, its blast echoing harmlessly into the night. Sarah rushed to Blaze's side, her heart pounding with adrenaline. She looked towards the fallen figure of her brother, a mixture of pity and anger swirling within her. Just then, the sound of sirens pierced the night. The local sheriff, alerted by Sarah's call, arrived, his vehicle's flashing lights illuminating the scene. Mark was apprehended, his reign of terror brought to an end. As the sheriff led Mark away, Sarah turned to Blaze, her eyes filled with gratitude and admiration. "You saved me, Blaze," she whispered, stroking his neck. "You saved us both." Blaze nuzzled her, his warm breath against her skin, a silent affirmation of their bond, their shared victory against the forces that threatened to tear them apart. The aftermath of Mark's arrest brought a wave of conflicting emotions for Sarah. Relief that the immediate danger had passed, anger at his betrayal, and a deep sadness for the brother she had lost. She watched the police car disappear down the dirt road, its red taillights fading into the darkness, and a sense of emptiness settled over her. The following days were a blur of legal proceedings and police interviews. Sarah recounted the events leading up to Mark's arrest, her voice trembling at times as she relived the trauma. She felt a strange mix of guilt and responsibility, as if she had somehow failed her brother, failed to steer him away from the destructive path he had chosen. The wildlife sanctuary offered their support, sending a representative to assess Blaze's condition and provide guidance on his care. They commended Sarah for her compassion and dedication, assuring her that Blaze was in good hands. One afternoon, a social worker visited Sarah's cabin. She was a kind woman, with gentle eyes and a calming presence. She spoke to Sarah about Mark's troubled past, his struggles with addiction and his history of petty crime. She explained the legal process, the possibility of rehabilitation, and the importance of forgiveness. Sarah listened intently, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She knew Mark had made bad choices, that he had caused harm and pain. But she also remembered the brother she had loved, the mischievous boy who had shared her childhood adventures, the troubled young man who had lost his way. The social worker encouraged Sarah to visit Mark in jail, to offer him support and a chance for reconciliation. Sarah hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready, if she could face him after what he had done. After days of contemplation, Sarah decided to visit Mark. She drove to the county jail, her heart pounding with apprehension. The sterile environment, the clanging bars, and the somber faces of the inmates filled her with a sense of unease. She found Mark in a small visiting room, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with regret. He looked up as she entered, a flicker of hope lighting up his weary features. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry." Sarah sat down opposite him, her gaze fixed on his. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Why did you do it?" He looked down, his shame evident in his slumped posture. I was desperate," he mumbled. I thought the money would solve everything." Sarah sighed, her heart aching for the brother she had lost. "It doesn't work that way, Mark," she said softly. "Money can't buy happiness, can't fix what's broken inside." They talked for a long time, their conversation filled with apologies, regrets, and tentative hopes for the future. Sarah didn't offer forgiveness, not yet, but she offered him understanding, a glimmer of hope that he could find redemption, that he could rebuild his life. As she left the jail, Sarah felt a sense of closure, a weight lifted from her shoulders. She knew the road ahead would be difficult for Mark, but she also knew that he wasn't alone. She would be there for him, offering support and guidance, helping him find his way back from the darkness. The winter snows melted, giving way to the vibrant colors of spring. Life at the cabin settled into a new rhythm, a peaceful routine punctuated by the sounds of nature. Sarah tended to her garden, the earth yielding its bounty under her care. The rescued owl, now fully healed, soared through the skies, its majestic wings carrying it to new heights. The orphaned raccoons, playful and mischievous, scampered through the trees, their laughter echoing through the forest. Blaze, now fully recovered, roamed the clearing with a renewed vigor. His coat gleamed in the sunlight, his muscles rippling beneath his sleek hide. He was a magnificent creature, a symbol of resilience and the enduring spirit of the wild. He had chosen to stay with Sarah, their bond deepened by the shared trials and triumphs. He would often graze peacefully in the meadow, his presence a comforting constant in her life. At times, he would disappear into the forest, answering the call of his wild instincts, exploring the hidden depths of his ancestral home. But he always returned, drawn back to the sanctuary Sarah provided, the haven where he had found peace and belonging. Sarah, in turn, found solace and purpose in caring for Blaze. He had become her companion, her confidant, a silent witness to her joys and sorrows. She would often talk to him, sharing her thoughts and feelings, finding comfort in his quiet presence. One day, as Sarah was grooming Blaze, she noticed a small herd of Mustangs grazing in the distance. They were a magnificent sight, their manes flowing in the wind, their powerful bodies moving with an effortless grace. Blaze lifted his head, his nostrils flaring as he caught their scent. He whinnied, a long, drawn-out call that echoed through the valley. The herd responded, their own calls echoing back, a chorus of recognition and welcome. Sarah watched as Blaze tensed, his muscles rippling beneath his skin. She knew he was torn between his loyalty to her and the pull of his wild instincts. She stroked his neck, her voice soft and reassuring. "Go on, Blaze," she whispered. "Go join them. You belong with your kind." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and a hint of sadness. He nuzzled her hand, a silent thank you for her understanding, for her unwavering love. Then, with a powerful surge, he galloped towards the herd, his mane flowing behind him like a banner of freedom. Sarah watched him go, her heart aching with a bittersweet mixture of loss and joy. She knew she might never see him again, but she also knew that she had done the right thing. She had given him back his freedom, a gift more precious than anything she could offer. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing, Sarah stood alone, a sense of peace settling over her. She had found a new purpose in life, a connection to the natural world that transcended the boundaries of human experience. She had learned the true meaning of compassion, the power of resilience, and the enduring strength of the human-animal bond. And in the quiet solitude of her sanctuary, she knew that Blaze would always be a part of her, his spirit forever etched in her heart.